People are still coming in. Welcome, everybody. I'll start by simply acknowledging that we're surrounded by so many holy days of joy, freedom, and renewal right now. And the increased sunshine over here in Connecticut, I think we probably have people from many different places tonight. And actually, if you want to put where you're joining us from in the chat, that would be great so we could see. Over here, we're in Connecticut, and although it was cold, we did get a lot of sunshine today, which makes it an especially warm and hopeful time of year. We embark soon upon the Jewish Passover, the Christian Easter. Our Muslim brothers and sisters are in the midst of Ramadan, and we have just passed the Baha'i New Year. And I'm probably not going to say this right, but Happy Nowruz.
Yes, you said it very well.
Very good. Happy Nowruz to our Baha'i friends. From all of us at Sharing Sacred Spaces to all of you celebrating your religious holidays, we hope you have days of peace, prosperity, and love. I see people have shared where they're from as well. I see, we have England, Connecticut, Wisconsin, Los Angeles, Virginia, Rome, Florida. This is unbelievable. California, New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut. Wonderful. Wow, we have an incredible array of people tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you new to our organization, I'm Vanessa Avery, the Executive Director of Sharing Sacred Spaces, where we foster understanding, relationship, and trust across difference through dialogue, education, hospitality, and most uniquely through the medium of sacred space and architecture. Our landscapes and our built environments embody meaning and contain stories. And we build understanding through deciphering and reflecting on all of the inherent narratives. We have several programs that are well explained on our website. Tonight is the launch of our 2023 Perspectives in Sacred Space webinar series. We do one of these sessions per quarter where we have a conversational format to delve into the meanings of our built environment. And I want to thank you all for being here, and a special shout out to Suzanne Morgan and the Hudson Community Foundation, and Martha Reinecke, who I hope is here, although I know she's traveling today, whose generous support has helped to make this event possible. Tonight, I am very pleased to introduce our guest, Mahdad Saniee. And I hope I pronounced that right, Mahdad.
You did.
Oh, good. He is the founder and principal of Baha'i Architects LLC, located in Greenwich, Connecticut. Mahdad studied and received his master's in architecture at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, after which he worked for the renowned conservationist firm Simpson and Brown. In 1985, he emigrated to the United States and shortly after moved to Connecticut and joined Centerbrook Architects, where he designed and managed projects nationwide, including buildings at MIT, Brandeis University, as well as many projects for private clients. In 1995, he established his own architectural firm in Greenwich, Connecticut. He's the recipient of over 50 architectural awards, and his work has been published in top newspapers, architectural magazines, and periodicals. He was named among the top 10 residential architects in the state of Connecticut by Home Building Digest in 2018. He's been visiting critic at the University of Hartford School of Architecture, served as a board member on the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, and on the AIA Design Awards juries. He maintains a small firm of 4 people, and despite the small size, his work extends really globally. So pleased to have you with us. We also have Dr. Michael Crosbie, who will be in conversation with Mahdad tonight. Dr. Crosbie served as an editor at Architecture, the AIA Journal, Progressive Architecture, ArchitectureWeek.com, and is editor-in-chief of Faith and Form, a quarterly journal on religious art and architecture. He's also a frequent contributor to Architectural Record and Common Edge, and writes about architecture and design for the Hartford Courant. The author of innumerable books and prestigious academic appointments, Dr. Crosbie is also a registered architect in the state of Connecticut, professor at the University of Hartford, and proudly board member for us of Sharing Sacred Spaces. Always great to be with you, Mike.
This is a pleasure. Thank you.
And with gratitude, I will pass the Zoom stage on to you.
The Zoom stage. Well, thank you very, very much for that introduction, Vanessa, and welcome everyone to an opportunity to talk to a very accomplished architect, a colleague of mine, as a matter of fact, and a friend whom I met at Centerbrook Architects. We were at Centerbrook around the same time. And I'm very, very happy to have him with us tonight because he knows intimately the subject that we're going to be discussing. So welcome, Mahdad. Now, the topic of our focus tonight is the architecture of the Baha'i faith. And one of the reasons that I got involved in sharing sacred spaces is this notion that you can understand a faith through its architecture, and you can also understand the architecture through an awareness of the tenets of the faith. And I think tonight is a really perfect example for that. And what I'd like to start out with is sort of recognizing the fact that the Baha'i faith in the United States is probably not very well known among the general population. And I was going to ask Mahdad to sort of start out by sort of telling us a bit about the faith itself and its beliefs and its rituals before we sort of get into the architectural expression of that faith.
Thank you very much, Vanessa and Michael, for inviting me to be with you. And thank you for all the participants for being here. I'm delighted to be participating and excited to be taking part in this. I think it does make sense, Mike, to actually provide a very short background. Once a friend of mine, or somebody I knew, said, isn't Baha'i one of the oldest religions? And I said, actually, no, it is actually one of the youngest world religions. I will give you a brief overview of its history and where it started from, and then we talk about the basic beliefs, and then we'll go from there. The history of the Baha'i faith starts with the appearance of a person whom, for those who are not familiar with the history of this religion, it would be a figure similar to, akin to John the Baptist. This person was called the Bab, not Bob, the Bab, which in Arabic means the gate. And he was an Iranian, a Persian, in the middle of 19th century. And he was a merchant in his 20s, and he made claim to be the promised one for the community that he was living. The movement that he started was a reformist movement in some ways, but also quite dramatically different and revolutionary in its approach. It gained a lot of adherents very quickly and became a threat to the government. The Shah were afraid of it. In a way, they abrogated what they described as the Sharia law of Islam. They said this is a new religion starting. But then the Bab himself made it clear that he was just the beginning. He was just the opening. He was the gate. The word Bab means the gate, is to yet another revelation, what we know as what we call the manifestations of God, who would come very shortly. Among his followers was a person who we now know by his title, Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. The Bab himself was arrested. He was put in prison, and shortly after he was put to death. He was executed by firing squad. It is reported that 750 bullets struck him, and the remains of his body were, by the instructions from Baha'u'llah, who was one of his most renowned followers, was concealed for a long time, and then eventually transferred to Palestine, and it is now in the center of a shrine that I will share a picture with you shortly.
Mahdad, what year was this?
This was it. He was executed in 1851.
Okay.
And then shortly after, in 1852, there was a lot of persecution of the Baha'i community at the time, because the Baha'i community hadn't emerged yet. And Baha'u'llah himself was one of the leaders of the community. Baha'u'llah himself came from a very well-connected, noble family. His father was a courtier, and he was offered a job in the Shah's court. And he had turned that down. He was not interested. And he was arrested after a series of persecutions and put in the dungeon, essentially a pit. It was a disused water reservoir, subterranean. And every day they would drag out a couple of Babis and they would kill them with some horrific circumstances. We won't get into that, but you can read about all of those things. He was there for 4 months. He didn't die, but in those 4 months, he did later on wrote down that he had received a intimation, a revelation, and that's, strictly speaking, is the beginning of the Baha'i revelation, as it were, the beginning of the Baha'i faith. And over time, he was freed from prison, and then he was exiled to the Ottoman Empire, first in Baghdad for about 10 years, 11 years, and then to Constantinople, finally to Adrianople. And then the government of the Shah of Iran at the time was so scared of the influence of these so-called radicals who wanted to reform the society, that they sent him to the penal colony of Akka. At the time was quite a backwater, but now is part of the state of Israel. And it at the time was Palestine. And they expected him to die very quickly, because Akka was a prison city, was not a pleasant place to be. He was actually in the prison itself for a while. Eventually, things eased up, and he was under house arrest for some time, and the rest of his life, in fact. He passed away in 1892, and he wrote many books and treatises and letters, and among his writings are his book of laws and explanation of various concepts related to revelation, of the previous revelation and his revelation. He passed away in 1892, and this is relevant. That's why I'm mentioning it. There's a lot of the history. I'm trying to jam it all in a very short period of time. After his passing, his eldest son, Abdul Baha, which means servant of Baha, became the leader of the community. And for the next almost 30 years was the leader of the community. Abdul Baha was a very interesting person, and Baha'u'llah asked his followers to use him as an example, to follow his example in everything they do. Abdul Baha traveled to the West, to Europe, and then to United States. He spent about a year in the United States. He met with influential people. He promoted racial harmony. In fact, it is one of the big occasions that there was a reception in his honor. He invited an African-American doctor to sit next to him, even though that man was not allowed to even enter the hotel on the regular door. And he promoted, at the time, the suffragette movement was just sort of taking hold. This is in 1911, 1912. Yeah. And he promoted the rights of equality of men and women based on his father's teaching. And he met a lot of prominent people, Teddy Roosevelt, among others, Alexander Graham Bell, among others. Among some of his early followers were people of influence. Phoebe Hearst, mother of William Randolph Hearst, was an early adherent. And Abdul Baha passed away in 1921, back in Palestine. He spent a couple of years in traveling, went back, and then the First War started. The British government gave him a knighthood because of his service to the community of Palestine and preventing, there was a shortage of food during the war, and he had foreseen that, and he had stored grain so they can distribute it to the poor. He was very well known, and his funeral was attended by followers of all the religions that were over there, by all the religious leaders. And then after that, there was the affairs of the community was in the hand of his grandson, who passed away in the 1950s. But in the writings of Baha'u'llah, the affairs of the community are run through elected officials. There is no clergy in the Baha'i community. There's no hierarchy in that regards. And the central tenets of the faith, if I could really encapsulate all of it, is that there is really one God, and we just happen to know that God by different names. There is one religion. Baha'u'llah says this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. We just happen to know it we're different names because they come at different times, according to Baha'u'llah, Baha'i teachings, because the religion is the same religion, but it has to be geared and calibrated to the capacity of the people it is presented to. So just as you tell a child certain things that is only appropriate for that age, but when that person becomes an adult, you can describe more. In the same way, religion is seen as the same thing. And then the third is oneness of humanity. There's really one race from a Baha'i perspective, and it's human race. Mm-hmm. And all the other racial divisions that we talk about is really social construct that we need to put aside. Mm-hmm. So the idea of this unity of deity, unity of religion, unity of humanity is central to the Baha'i thinking. Yes. And so that's a very quick overview. I want to share this. Let's see if I could share this image. Sure. This is the Shrine of the Bab, which is now completed with terraces, as you see here. This Shrine of the Bab started as a very simple structure. The remains of the Bab were hidden from the authorities for a very long time. It took about 50, 60 years to get it over to the Holy Land. And as you can see, there's a small structure here that was built at the time of Abdul Baha. And then later on, a superstructure was designed by William Sutherland Maxwell, a Canadian architect who was trained in the Beaux-Arts School. And if you go to Quebec City, you would see that he's working in the large hotel that is hard to avoid. He was a very gifted architect. He was a well-known architect, and he's highly regarded. And he designed the superstructure. And this is a shrine. It's not a Baha'i temple. It is the place where the Bab is buried. There are other pictures of this. They're in the late 90s. These terraces were added. There are 18 terraces. 9 down to the bottom of the mountain, 9 up from the shrine itself. And these terraces are open to the public. Everybody can attend to it. This is the terrace just looking at the shrine itself.
Mm-hmm. Mahdad, this is the one in Haifa.
This is the one in Haifa. Yeah. And the reason it is in Haifa because Baha'u'llah was passed away in Akkad, close across the bay, and the Bab's remains were taken there. The Baha'i community around the founder of the faith ended up in that place. Of course, in places such as Iran, where I am from, the enmity towards Baha'is is among the clergy of the country is high, and they accuse Baha'is of being spies for Israel because we happen to have our shrines in there. You pointing out to them that when this occurred, it was called Palestine. There was no state of Israel at the time. And so it accused Baha'is of being spies. But these are among the kind of burdens that the Baha'i community carries and the Baha'is carry. And sometimes they pay with their lives for it, including an uncle of mine and a cousin of mine who in the early 80s were either forced to either recant their faith or be executed. They didn't, and they were executed. So this, as my story is not unique, as there are many who have suffered, and it's still, unfortunately, that continues. Yeah. From this perspective, if you look at this, all previous religions from a Baha'i perspective are honored, or the previous revelations are are treated as equal. Years ago, I remember reading an article in the Times of London. It said, Baha'i faith, a tolerant religion. And I kept on thinking about it, saying, actually, that isn't true, because you tolerate something that you disagree with. Yeah. But from a Baha'i perspective, all the relations are valid. So it's not a question of tolerance, it's just acceptance that these are all the same.
Yeah, exactly. Can you talk a bit about how the worship environment, the temple itself is, how it's used, what its function is in the Baha'i faith? What
I can. Now, before I do that, I want to read a little bit of a translation of one of the writings of Baha'u'llah, which is quite important. Baha'u'llah says in one of his writings, says, blessed is the spot and the house and the place and the city and the heart and the mountain and the refuge and the cave and the valley and the land and the sea and the island and the meadow where the mention of God has been made and his praise glorified. Mm-hmm. From this perspective, Baha'is derive their lives from, they balance their lives from the writings of Baha'u'llah and elucidations by Abdul Baha. Any place that you gather and you mention God is blessed. So in a way, you could gather in my basement, and that in itself is a blessed spot. Mm-hmm. This is not dissimilar to the early Christian communities where they were under persecution and they met in subterranean places and they held together for fellowship and for coming together. So this is not dissimilar at all. Yeah. With that said, Baha'is started putting together, having places of worship beyond just their own homes early in its history. The first Baha'i house of worship was built in Ashgabat, which is in Turkmenistan, and it was finished in around early 20th century. I believe it was 1908. It was completed. Mm-hmm.
And what guided that, the design of that building, do you think?
Well, I do have a picture of it. At the time, Abdul Baha was alive, and and the Baha'i community in Turkmenistan was enlarging very fast. It became one of the reasons was it's a neighboring country to Iran, and there was a very large Baha'i community in Iran. It's the land of its birth. And those who were escaping persecution, including my grandfather, ended up in Ashgabat for a while or for a long time. So the community grew pretty dramatically. So Abdul Baha told them that there's an opportunity to actually have a place where they could come together. Mm-hmm. Now, Baha'i Temple is part of a central edifice of an institution that Baha'u'llah set out. Is an institution, the word translated with the dawning place of remembrance would be the right translation. And it is envisioned as a place of worship around which services to community can take place. Maybe places are to take care of people who are homeless. Maybe there are hospice. Maybe there are places that you take care of the elderly. But a central edifice of a community would be this place of worship. And that's one of the reasons came to be. Now, if I see if I could find a picture of that house of worship. This is a picture of the very first house of worship. It has a kind of a mosque look to it. It was the first attempt. This building, after the Russian Revolution, was taken over and turned into I believe a library. I may be mistaken. And then in the 1940s, there were earthquakes and it was damaged beyond repair, so it was torn down. And nothing is, I believe it's a public park right now.
I see. So what's involved in the worship service? I mean, is there a service, or what are the rituals involved, and what does a temple have to fulfill in terms of its role in the belief system?
Well, it's really a place of coming together. The Baha'i temple Abdul Baha explains that Baha'i temple is, he gives general guidelines. It should be it should have 9 doors. It should be round and have a dome. And these are and he further explains would be pleasant to go through gardens. Maybe there's water elements around it. It's in the nature. And there is no sermon delivered in there. There's no ceremonies allowed there. There's no musical instruments can be played there. You could have a cappella singing, chanting of prayers, or saying of prayers. So where there are services, for instance, if you go to the one in Wilmette near Chicago, which is the one in the United States at the moment, you will find on Sunday mornings where everybody is off, they could go there and attend the service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you enter a Baha'i temple, is there a sense of what it should be? Is there an overwhelming feeling that one strives for in the design of these environments?
Well, yes, there is. Well, first of all, there is really no fixed seating in there. There are 9 avenues of approach to it. Yes. And for instance, there are different times, different ones that are made. This is a Baha'i house of worship in Uganda, and this is Baha'i house of worship Australia. These were done in the middle of the 20th century, so they were based on the kind of classical orders of a bass, a drum, and a dome. Yes. In later years, other designs began to emerge. For instance, this one is in Panama, which is still conforms to the 9 sides. This is a much smaller structure, has a dome, and is a much simpler, more modest structure. In contrast, the one in India has a shape of a lotus flower. And we can talk a little bit about symbolism briefly, as time goes by. And as I'm trying to see if there is a picture of the inside that I have readily. This is the one in Chile that finished a few years ago. And the most recent one is the one that finished in in the Democratic Republic of Congo, only dedicated last week or the week before. Huh. And this is inside the dome. When you look up, you see the simplicity of the dome. It's all, again, 9 sides, and this is just among pictures from the dedication, which I just pulled from the internet just today.
Yeah. What is the significance of 9, the number 9, in terms of the doors and the side?
Well, these were, first of all, number 9 has I find its connection with the name Baha. Baha means glory. And in its Arabic language, where the script was written, each letter of alphabet has a numerical value. So Baha comes to 9, but also 9 is the largest single digit. It's a symbolic use of a number. We could have, if we had Baha said use the word, the number 8, we would have been talking about number 8. In itself doesn't have any connection to any heaven or hell or anything. It's just a number that's been used. But it has a connection, a symbolic connection. But beyond it, a house of worship has different doors. And in a way, you can associate each of these doors associated with different religions. The idea is different doors open up from different religions, but all come together under one dome, under one globe, under one sky.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you now? It's been my impression, and I think the images that you've shown here bear this out. I have always seen these temples as being rather innovative in terms of their architectural expression. I mean, there isn't like one way of doing this. And I wondered if my impressions are accurate. It seems like I know that the building in Wilmette was rather experimental in its use of concrete, right? In terms of its construction.
It was, and I'm just finding that I did not queue up a picture of the one in Wilmette. I can do a quick search, but everybody can do the same thing. It is. the innovation really started. The Baha'i Temple in Wilmette was designed by Louis Bourgeois, who was a Canadian sculptor. He wasn't really an architect at all. And he had a structure which was 3 times the size, which would have been impossible to achieve. This design was approved by Abdul Baha himself when he was traveling, and the cornerstone was laid by Abdul Baha. And if you actually go and visit the Wilmette Temple in the basement, in the lower level, there's a visitor center, and you can see the stone that was laid as a foundation. The design of that has a lot of innovation, but when I look closely, I see a lot of similarity with Louis Sullivan's architecture, the organic architecture of Chicago of that time in its ornamentation. In its basic setup, the structure is quite classical in that still has a base, has a drum, and it has a dome, not unlike the ones that we just saw previously, like this one, for instance. But that began to change in the 60s, for instance, this one. And the one that became very influential is the Lotus Temple, was designed by Fariborz Safwa, who is a friend, and I've known him from childhood. He's older than me and wiser, I think. And he wanted to connect the architecture to the local environment, to the local culture. This idea of unity in diversity is very important in the Baha'i community, in that Baha'is don't seek uniformity. They accept diversity, and they see unity within all of that. So celebration of the local culture, celebration of local environment is encouraged. That's why it is natural that the architecture that emerges would connect with the local culture.
Exactly. So it's there's not one style that is accepted, but it sort of takes on the qualities of the place that it's in terms of its traditions, its imagery, and that's really the approach, which I think is rather healthy in a way, and it does sort of lend itself to innovation as well. Now, tell us about this building.
Well, I mean, this is just another example of a local culture where fire has a significance and symbolism. And this is not built, this is a project. And this really plays on the whole idea of a place of fire with an interior which looks up to the heights towards the sky. Now, one theme that Baha'i temples share is that at the center of their dome is an inscription. And an inscription in the Baha'i terminology is called greatest name. It basically says the glory of the most glorious, or a symbol. Now, if I were to show you for instance, in this particular scheme, this symbol is not really indicated in there. Everything is 9-sided in this particular scheme. But the idea is that, I'm going to find this particular symbol for you, it is a symbol that Abdul Baha created to explain the relationship between humanity and God. And it's a very simple, now don't get kind of confused by a lot of the other details. Essentially, there are 3 lines: the world of God, world of manifestations of God, and world of humanity. And they're all connected through a manifestation of God. So that even though there are separate realms, realm of humanity, realm of manifestations of God. So in other words, no matter how hard you try, you never can become Jesus Christ, because he lives in a different realm. And the world of God is separate from it. But for instance, in the Christian tradition would be, he connects all these 3 elements together. In the Baha'i world, it would be Baha'u'llah who connects these 3 worlds together. So this symbol would show up in the top of the edifice, or a calligraphy that would be similar to that. For instance, you would see this is a calligraphy. It says, "O glory of the most glorious," which is essentially talking about the most greatest name. That's what the Baha'i terminology.
This is the one in Santiago,
This is the one in Santiago, Chile, and this is the one in Congo, which is just finished. There is one this is in Germany. And do I have another one? I don't have another one ready made for you right now.
Now, one thing that I've noticed, especially in the images that you've been showing, is that there seems to be a very, very close connection with nature in the design of these environments. Um, in symbolically, I would say, and then literally, because some of the ones you've been showing have these very elaborate gardens and landscaping around the temple. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is there a sort of a theological reason for that?
Not so much of a direct theological reason, I would say, but the guidance, or at least the writings of Abdul Baha, which become a source of inspiration for a lot of Baha'is, foresee that these temples are surrounded by gardens. And it is natural that when you want to create a harmonious place, which doesn't have a well, first of all, is a non-hierarchical space.
Yeah.
And you want to be at harmony with the environment that you're in. It is almost inevitable. You want to bring the nature in. Now, as you see, the later ones, the more recent Baha'i houses of worship, has a more direct connection with nature. And I'm going to predict that as more of these are built, the architects would find ways to bring nature even closer to, and because the beauty of the nature also to within. So the place of worship is not just within an environment. Going back to Baha'u'llah's prayer, blessed is the spot, you could say that the gardens around it is an extension of the temple, is an extension of place of worship.
Exactly. Now, you this project that you designed, that is yet to be built, but it may be moving in that direction. Where exactly is that?
Well, let's not get to that one for now, but that's just a project for now. So we'll just leave that as it is. I'm sorry, I don't want to get into that. But there are places these are Baha'i houses of worship, but there are other places that Baha'is get together. And for instance, this project that we did a while back in Maine, it's a place that Abdul Baha visited. It's a Green Acre retreat Baha'i school, and this is a function hall that we designed, and this is the same property at the beginning of 20th century. So the spirit of maintaining the spirit of that. This is a picture of Abdul Baha, by the way. Michael, you do have a beard very similar to him, so that's why I always thought you would look very saintly. So
I need a hat like that.
You do need a hat, but kudos to you for having a saintly appearance. This is some presentation which I believe happened a year ago, and this is again a celebration of the space. There's reenactment of a peace treaty in that particular hall. Now, these are not houses of worship, but these are places of congregation where people can come together for functions, for worship as well. This hall acts as both, because there is no house of worship in Maine. So this acts as one when the community is together.
I see. And what has been your experience in working with congregations? Like who makes the decisions about?
Yeah, well, the way Baha'is run their own affairs is through election. So in every locality, Baha'is elect 9 people who would run their affairs of the community for the following year, and nobody can nominate themselves or anybody. Nobody is nominated. It's always secret ballot based on the trust, and so that means that these committees groups have to be very small. These are called local spiritual assemblies, and they then they also through election of delegates, elect national spiritual assemblies that run the affairs of the community in a country. So the decisions are made that way. But when it comes to designing facilities, the idea of consulting with the community is natural to the Baha'i DNA. There is, when I say consultation, some people may think visiting a doctor. From a Baha'i terminology, consultation means coming together and putting our minds together, and without having to fight over for my idea or your idea or his idea or her idea, is coming to a consensus about a decision to be made for certain things, for whatever it is.
Mhm.
So the idea of involving a congregation in decision-making in the design is something that has always resonated with me as a Baha'i. And when I came to Connecticut, one of my reasons I wanted to go and work with Centerbrook was because Charles Moore, as you know, had already done a lot of the workshops where he brought the participants into the design process. Now,
Very open.
it's a tricky thing to do. You really, I mean, it really requires somebody with the skill of Charles Moore to pull it off, because it is very easy to get sidetracked when you're doing such a thing. I had the opportunity to have a couple of these workshops, one at the United Methodist Church in a cathedral in Washington, D.C., and another one in Newtown, Connecticut, where we brought the congregation, and the pastor at the end of the day was surprised by some of the outcomes, because the group comes up with different things than one person may be thinking of.
Yes. Yes. Now, we don't have much more time left. This has been a really stimulating presentation, and we have about 15 minutes. So I want to spend some time allowing our members of our audience to ask some questions. And they can do that, Vanessa, by just opening their mics, right? And asking if they wish.
Yes, exactly. Actually, Mahdad, thank you. That's exact. You read my mind. So now we can see everyone. If you have a question, you can, I guess, raise your hand. But if you don't see any other hands raised, just unmute yourself and ask.
How many Baha'is are in the United States, Mahdad? Or I guess I can ask you, Michael.
Oh, okay. You want to know how many Baha'i followers of the Baha'i faith are in the United States?
Yes.
That's a difficult question to answer, because there are different statistics taken, not just for Baha'is, but for different religions. When the statistics are taken, is to do with people identify themselves as such, or whether they are active participants in a congregation. So if you look at the active participants in congregation, Baha'is in the United States would be on the order of 150,000. But a recent survey, which kind of had a lot of Baha'is scratching their heads, people who identified more closely with the Baha'i faith than anything else, the number was much higher, and which was surprising to many. And we don't know what that means, which is sort of the order of 700,000. It could be people who have read it, and they read something about it, and they identify with it more closely than with anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So it really comes to the question of who is a Baha'i and who is not. At the moment, Baha'is register so they can vote for their local assemblies and participate in community life. That number is always smaller. As you go to any religious congregation, those who actually are core participants are always a fraction of those who actually believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you.
Robin Hawkins, you had your hand up. Yeah, please.
I was wondering how many other cities in the United States we could visit to find examples of some of those beautiful. I don't see myself getting to go to India or Australia in the near future, but I would love to be able to visit something in the United States. You mentioned Chicago, perhaps, but I didn't understand if there was a place to visit there. So.
Well, Baha'i houses of worship, as you could appreciate, Baha'i faith is fairly new, and it is actually not by number, but in terms of localities that it is spread throughout the globe, is second largest to Christianity in terms of the spread, but the total number is much smaller, number of adherents. So Baha'is initially started establishing or building houses of worship in each continent first, one in each continent. And then in the last 20 years, there've been more of an effort to build Baha'i temples in localities, in countries where the number has grown sufficiently to require it. Unfortunately, in the United States, there's only one Baha'i house of worship. That's the one in Wilmette. It's worth the trip, but and Chicago is a lovely town to visit.
Yeah.
Go in the summer, as I'm sure you know. Don't go in
Yeah.
the winter; it's just too cold. But there are Baha'i centers. There are over 150 Baha'i facilities, Baha'i centers, but these are not necessarily all exciting architectural facilities to visit. You could go there to visit the community. Some of them are very interesting, and others are just very simple old church that has been purchased and has been repurposed for use by Baha'i community.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes. Lucinda.
First, these buildings you've shown are so gorgeous. The first thing that pops into my mind is, who paid for these things? I mean, they're just fabulous structures, but maybe more importantly, you said there's no real structure to worship. I'm just comparing what little I know about mosques, where there's an orientation towards Mecca, or spaces to cleanse, spaces to pray, that sort of thing. Is it totally unstructured? You can do the second question first.
Well, it's not that's unstructured. Is that, I mean, you can visit a Baha'i house of worship at any time, and there's no program going on. You sit on a chair and you say your prayer without disturbing anybody else. The person sitting next to you may be a Muslim, maybe a Jew, maybe a Christian. It doesn't matter. Maybe a Buddhist, maybe a Hindu. It doesn't matter. You don't disturb each other, and you say quietly. Now, if there are programs, the seats normally are directed towards the direction that Baha'i say prayer. I mean, in the Christian church is all towards east, correct? And in a mosque is towards Mecca. In the Baha'i houses of worship, the orientation of chairs, which are most of the time, as far as I know, none of them are fixed, but their orientation generally towards where Baha'u'llah is buried. So, which is towards, and today is Israel, would be, where it was Palestine. So it would be towards Holy Land. But there is a structure in terms of somebody is in charge of putting the program together. So they select music or readings. Readings are not confined to the Baha'i writings. A lot of them are, but not necessarily. So if you attend one of the Baha'i services, you would hear reading from the Bible or the prayers from the Jewish tradition or this Muslim tradition or others as well.
Thank you.
Let me ask you: are there, when you're designing one of these environments, are there guidelines that are published or made available to designers in terms of designing a temple?
Not really. They're very simple outlines, 9-sided. The only limitation is 9 sides, round, and dome. As you see from the examples, the dome can be interpreted in a variety of ways. To the previous question that I didn't answer, the money is paid by Baha'is only. Baha'is do not accept monetary contribution from those who are not followers of the religion. So the money is always raised by Baha'is themselves and paid for by the Baha'i community. Now, Baha'is can provide services to the community at large, but they don't accept money for their own community from others.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Elham, your mic, I can't hear your mic. There you go. Try again. Nope. Oh.
First of all, good evening.
There you are.
Okay. Thanks for your interesting lecture about this topic. To be honest, it was the first time I heard about it, and I'm proud that as an Iranian living in Rome, I heard from one of my people. Actually, first of all, I'm terribly sorry because of the discrimination that is happening in our country about your religion, and totally respect to that. It was so interesting for me. Of course, the most important one was that the idea of diversity that you told aligned with the unity. It was so interesting, so many type and so many styles. Something that I want to ask you to maybe clarify it more is that you spoke at the beginning about the idea of giving some services to the people, for example, the congregational center, etc. What about the other actually services? And is there any special place that the designers allocate for these type of services, or like the mosque, for example, just they have some spaces and they say, okay, it is for some of the gatherings, but it is not especially designed for those purposes. I want to know, is there any type of just belonging to the services and allocated in these type of buildings, or not, just like the mosque and the other?
Well, the services, the social services that the community can offer to the community at large are done not within the houses of worship themselves, but in structures surrounding them. For instance, the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette for a very long time had a house for the aged as adjacent to it. This other structure was a building that was acquired by the Baha'i community and ran for a number of years. And over time, they discovered that people can get the same services through other means much more readily. And so that building was sold, and that particular service was terminated because that's available through government or other means. But for instance, I understand, I haven't visited the Baha'i House of Worship in India, where I understand a lot of those social services are dispensed through buildings that are surrounding it, but not within the temple itself.
Oh, so there is no limitation to follow the same style or the same construction method, just there are some adjacent buildings. And also you spoke about, if I'm not mistaken, the music is forbidden, musical instruments, something like that, yes? Or maybe
musical instrument.
And why? Is there any special reason for that? Because it seems that your religion is so open and so sophisticated, and that was weird for me to hear about this.
Well, I'm speculating, and what you hear today is actually my understanding of it. So, and I by no means, even though I sometimes pretend I am perfect, I'm not. So I really don't really know the answers to all of those. My understanding is, my take is that inside the temple, the whole idea is, I can't imagine a Baha'i temple where we have, for instance, paintings of figures. It's to focus one's mind on the essence of the belief. Now, musical instruments, there is a very wide range to that experience. Only in the Baha'i, you could have a Baha'i center or a congregational hall where you play jazz, play classical, play or whatever you want. And that goes on all the time. I went to a Baha'i center in Atlanta, south of Atlanta, one of the suburbs. And I went on a Sunday morning and they had a whole, music going on. And that music was different than music that you would hear if you went to, for instance, a service in Congo. But in the temple itself, the idea is to keep all things away other than the words themselves, to focus on the purity of the revelation. And that's why I think that's my take on it.
Thank you for explanation. It was so perfect.
I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. You brought up a really interesting point, which is religious art. And because art plays a very, very different role in different religious faiths, what would you say is the orientation of the Baha'i faith towards the arts in the worship spaces themselves?
That's a very good question. I think when I look at, from what I've learned over the years, if I look at the 2nd century of the Christian era, for instance, what would I see? I would see a lot of basilicas that was inherited from the Roman Empire, and the Christian art per se hadn't really emerged. And if I look at the 2nd century of, for instance, the Muslim era, I would find similar things. The height of the beauty of the mosques or the churches, the Gothic high art, all of that had yet to emerge centuries later. It is hard for me to kind of speculate about it. I would have to be a prophet, and I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. But I would think that the focus on the purity of the word of revelation is going to be supreme in that. Yes. And where you have the arts, and also the arts, depending on where you are, it's a global religion. So the art that you might find in a Southern African nation might be very different from one you would find in Cambodia, for instance. Yeah. So Baha'is want to accommodate all of that. Yeah. So I would say my prediction is foreseeable future is going to stay away from limiting ourselves to just one type or the other.
Very good. You know, it's interesting that you bring up the calligraphy, the idea of the word, because in many religious traditions, calligraphy becomes important in the decoration of the worship environment. So, and certainly the Baha'i faith has that, you know, where you sort of showed different examples of that in the temples. We are just about out of time. It's almost 8 o'clock, and I want to thank you, Mahdad, for really opening our eyes about this faith tradition and the environments that have been created for it. And yeah, I don't know your name, but you just put your hand up. Okay.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much, Miss Vanessa, yourself, Dr. Crosbie, and Mr. Mahdad. I've been an admirer of our speaker tonight ever since he was doing his master's in Edinburgh. So I go 4 decades following his distinguished career, Miss Vanessa, and admiring him. And in fact, I'm speaking to you at 1 o'clock after midnight, Mr. Crosbie. But I just wanted to add, so there is an element of loyalty and faithfulness in the Baha'i faith, that we should keep our friends and love them to bits over the years. And Mahdad knows, and Dr. Crosbie and Vanessa, you should know, because you're in Connecticut, how much I admire every year when autumn comes. I don't know, God, how many more autumns and falls is left for me, but I always, when the leaves start falling in Connecticut and New England, I cry inside myself. I say, Mahdad, another year of my short life is past. Attained the worship of New England, the beauty of it. So I admire. But I just wanted to add 2 things, Dr. Crosbie and Miss Vanessa. And I think these wonderful people in this admire this, appreciate this. Baha'u'llah wrote, and I recently went to his prison and visited there for 9 days. Baha'u'llah wrote, and Mahdad knows this very well, and all of you, I think, that Baha'u'llah wrote that for 9 years, I didn't see a blade of grass. I didn't see a tree. I didn't see a meadow. So in terms of dearest Mahdad saying these houses of worship will be at the confluence of trees and meadows and beautiful things, I think this is something which becomes very poignant. And on the other side, Mahdad mentioned that there is light. There is light in the Chile temple. He showed a lot of pictures. And the predecessor of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, the gate, he says for 9 months in the prison, he wasn't given a candle. So the point I was making, dearest friends, is that the Baha'i endeavor of positivity, which dearest Mahdad presented tonight, is based on the fact that, I don't know, it's a little bit very much like the Christian experience that our Lord Jesus Christ suffered, as it were, to bring humanity to a state of transcendence. Mm-hmm. So these houses of worship, you know, these prayer things is not just the sort of the decoration or the music and the painting on the wall. It's to invite us to transcend the sort of sadness that is in this contingent world. I mean, you are in a very lucky place, the United States, but in Britain and in Europe, when we are still divided and we are still fighting, and today is the first time our king spoke in Germany. So to reconcile and to be united, isn't that a point, Mahdad, that you used to teach us in those Sunday classes? I would like to hear your comments on that.
Well, I think we're out of time. I would love to talk to you about that, but I've been told by Vanessa and Michael that they are fairly strict with the time limit. And I would love to have the opportunity to continue this conversation maybe on another occasion And Khaza, I miss your presence, and I really appreciate the point of view you brought. You're absolutely correct. These places of worship are places to transcend this mortal coil, as it were.
Thank you. I think that's probably a perfect place to end, although we could go on for another hour, I'm sure. That's always the case. And thank you, sir, from your poetry in Britain at 1 a.m. is better than mine can ever be at our hour at 8 o'clock. So thank you so much for that incredible contribution.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa.
We have this has been truly inspiring, and we have one of these conversations every quarter. So please, if you look on our website where you signed up, you can subscribe to get updates on those. We announce the speakers. We'll announce each within the next month or two for the next session. We also will have our annual Building Bridges Summit coming up in the fall. And of course, if you are either in one of our on-ground locations in Northern Virginia, hi Lucinda, or in Dallas, I don't know if we have anyone here from Dallas, but also we'll be having on-site sacred site visits starting in June in Northern Virginia. So if you're in any one of our local places, look online, you'll be able to see those and register as well. I want to thank everyone for being here. If you had a question, these are things that if you email me, we can take care of pointing you towards some resources to answer your question. So please do so if you'd like to. Thank you everyone for being here and for all you do to bring out the compassion and beauty in the world. If you'd like to support our work, please know donations can be made on our website. Every penny goes toward a better world. And thank you to our wonderful guest, Mahdad, to Michael Crosbie, always our wonderful host, and thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much for your time.